Hi everyone, I'm Alyssa Herrera,
I'm Mia Saha.
I'm Mia Martinson.
And I'm Kimberly Villagrán.
and we're all biology majors at Cal State Fullerton. And over the past few decades, we've dived into Dr. Graves' research on evolution, nanoparticles, Drosophila, bacteria, and race. And today we're going to wrap up and connect everything and share what we've learned.
One of the first papers we read was Belly of the Beast by Dr. Graves. And this is mainly about Dr. Graves' struggles he went through in becoming a biologist as an undergraduate student. Even after all his triumphs, he has accomplished his master's in biology from Lowell University and a PhD from University of Michigan in environmental evolutionary and systematic biology, and second PhD from Wayne State University. Some of the struggles Dr. Grace went through in becoming a biologist because of the biases of other faculty and professors he has had. He overcame this by coming up with some unwritten rules as advice for other biologists experiencing the same struggles.
We also read his research papers, one of them being the rapid evolution of silver nanoparticle resistance in E. coli. In this particular study, Dr. Graves investigated how E. coli bacteria can quickly evolve resistance to silver nanoparticles, which are commonly found in medical equipment to kill bacteria and keep everything sterile. His research challenged the idea that nanoparticles are without flaw, since he was able to show the resistance E. coli can evolve, even through small genetic changes.
Dr. Graves and his coworkers also have a paper discussing the genomics of parallel experimental evolution in Drosophila, in which they look into the genomic foundation of adaptation in sexual populations of the fruit flies, and they use fitness, character, and whole genome sequence data of 30 Drosophila laboratory populations, and they found that at a high degree of evolutionary parallelism in fitness, phenotypes was seen as most recent selection regimens. Genomic parallelism was also seen with respect to the frequencies of single nucleotide polymorphisms, transposable elements, insertions, and structural variants, and the team believed that the pattern was due to segregation of functional genetic variation, which is maintained genome-wide by selection and response to changes of selection regimen. This leads us to Dr. Gibbs' research on race, which sheds light on applying evolutionary perspective and debunking myths believed about race as a biological category.
The main idea of paper one is that biological races do not exist in human species, and instead, race and racism is a social construct that has been created. He mentions that there is no significant genetic subdivision within humans that could categorize humans into biological races, and instead, genetic variation is explained by isolation by distance, where population gradually varies based on geographic location. In addition, he explains the misuse of evolutionary biology to justify racial hierarchies through scientific racism. He explains the principle of discordance, where physical traits do not align with genetic ancestry, and demonstrates the fallacy of race as a biological category.
The first half of paper two discusses the concept of race, where it originated, and if there are any genetic differences to support race. In short, race is defined as in the paper as a social classification based on appearance and assumed ancestry. Race is often mistaken for being related to genetic differences between groups of people. In fact, the most interesting thing that I read in the paper was that a recent survey of more than 1,600 Americans demonstrated that the majority of individuals felt that race was both a social category and based on biological attributes. This misconception is everywhere. The reading shares an example of how medical websites such as WebMD state that research shows that Caucasian and Asian women are more likely to develop osteoporosis than women of other ethnic backgrounds. This leads primary care providers to not run proper tests when people have concerns if their race is not as likely to have a disease, even if their concerns and issues directly correlate to that disease. It is widely known that simply because a race is not as susceptible, it does not mean that they will never have a disease and should not have to worry about it. It was also interesting to note that all humans are genetically identical at about 99.8% of the DNA nucleotides, and their only differences are about at 3 of every 1,000 letters. Although we present as different due to phenotypic differences, humans are rather homogeneous.
This paper also talks about human variation, and that it comes through evolution. An example in this paper states is the change in skin color over time, which I found the most interesting. After losing a hairy body from our primate ancestors, modern humans originated from the hot and sunny tropics and evolved to have darker skin to protect UV radiation and damage to folic acid naturally occurring in the body. Then, as smaller populations began to drift from sub-Saharan Africa, the more alleles were lost. Therefore, Africans have the highest genetic variation. New variations is then from non-deleterious mutations. Phenotypic variation can be explained by evolution through different genes being expressed in different ecological conditions. So the main point of this paper is the differences in phenotypes and health are not due to genotypes, but through environmental differences. Let's segue into why the beliefs that phenotype and health differences is not due to genetics is a problem. People who are of European descent are white people who see race as biologically based um, the race as biology based say that racism has reduced significantly, but this is not the case. People of darker complexion are treated differently in the workplace, education facilities, and quality of life is negatively impacted. The biggest misconception is that irrational hatred towards a person of a different race is racism, but it is actually bigotry. Racism requires social power and the belief that people are biologically inferior. It's important to note that the belief that someone can be turned into another race by changing their environment is not evolution. Evolution is a gradual process through natural selection, and genetic variation is passed down through reproduction. This produces the phenotypic variation amongst humans, not biological race. The first part of the paper, three, focuses on the importance of evolutionary biology in medicine. The term racial medicine signifies the belief of some practicing people in medicine that a lot of diseases can be explained based on the race that patients identify as.
So to elaborate more on Dr. Graves' evolutionary versus racial medicine paper, the key point that I found was that racial medicine is flawed and that health disparities are not based on race and can mostly be explained by genetic factors, the environment that an individual grew up in or is currently living in, and social issues. So, for example, African Americans often experience higher rates of diabetes and heart disease, but these outcomes are often linked to factors like access to healthy foods, pollution exposure, and stress from systemic racism they may face. Graves critiques using the concept of racial medicine, where race is used like a shortcut to predict people's health outcomes. He goes into a specific example where he critiques Bedil, which is a drug treatment that was marketed specifically for Black people. He talked about how its approval was based on studies that did not test broadly enough to accurately make those kinds of claims. This type of race specific drug assumes race is biological when it's actually a social construct. It's better to focus less on race and more on the genetics and environmental factors to understand health issues. Dr. Graves makes the argument that focusing on racial medicine is a distraction from actually addressing the true issues that cause health differences between races. I felt that this was a powerful paper because it shifts the focus from or to address the systemic issues like poverty, the environment, and healthcare and accessibility, which have much more of an impact on health differences between races. And I think Dr. Gray's work was probably one of the first times I've seen research actually connect with social issues, so I thought that was a pretty interesting perspective.
From what we have explored about Dr. Graves' work, we have found that he connects evolution, medicine, and social issues and shows that science goes beyond understanding the natural world and can help create a more equitable society. Thank you for tuning in. We hope you have enjoyed going through this journey learning about Dr. Graves' career and contributions to biology.